What would you do if one day your parents kicked you out of the house to give your room to their 9-year-old niece? I've been in that situation. While we were still arguing about it, my grandfather showed up, and what happened next took everyone by surprise. What did he do? Did he stand up for me? Stay with me, I'll tell you what happened. Hello everyone. My name is Oliver. I'm 28 years old and am a sales rep for a real estate company in Chicago. You could say my life is pretty peaceful these days, at least compared to everything that happened in the past. Every morning before heading to work, I have coffee with my grandfather. We sit by the kitchen window, looking out at the small backyard garden, and he usually tells me stories from his younger days. Those moments always bring me a deep sense of calm. In the afternoons, when my shift ends, instead of grabbing coffee or hanging out like most of my coworkers, I rush back to our house in the Chicago suburbs to take care of my grandfather. He's 83 now and battling lung cancer. When the doctors told us he didn't have much time left, I decided to spend every possible moment with him. The real reason I chose to do this is because, in my entire family, my grandfather is the only one who's ever truly loved me and stood by me. During all the hard times, when everyone else turned their backs, he was the only one who never left me. This peaceful life I have now, it's just me and my grandfather. As for my parents and my sister Mia, we cut ties after a major family drama that went down 2 years ago. My story began on a July evening in 2023. When I pulled to the front gate around 6 p.m., I noticed a familiar silver Honda Accord parked in the driveway. It was Mia's car, my sister's. The moment I saw it, I felt a bit surprised. Mia rarely visited during the week like this. She usually only showed up on weekends and not very often. As I walked into the house, the scene in front of me made me stop in the doorway and frown. Nearly 8 suitcases were neatly arranged in the living room, ranging from large black ones to small pink travel bags for kids. At that moment, Mia was sitting on the sofa with Zoe, her 9-year-old daughter. Mia looked tired and tense, her eyes red and puffy, as if she had been crying. Zoe was sitting there playing on her iPad. What confused me the most was this. It was just the two of them. There was no sign of Mason. Her husband was always with them whenever they visited. After exchanging a few polite words with my sister and niece, I couldn't help but ask what had been on my mind. Looking her straight in the eyes with genuine concern, I asked, "Where's Mason?" After my question, Mia was silent for a moment, then looked down at her hands and replied in a calm but slightly trembling voice, "Mason and I got divorced." Hearing that unexpected news, I felt a mild shock wave over me. Not wanting to make her sadness any worse, I stayed quiet, asked no more, and returned to my room. Around 7 p.m., a car pulling into the garage signaled that my parents were home. In their hands were paper bags filled with takeout from the restaurant Mia used to love back when she lived with us. They had gone out to pick up dinner earlier that afternoon, right after Mia called to let them know she was coming back and would be staying for a while. That explained why they weren't home when I got back around 6. As for my grandfather, Robert, true to his longtime routine, he had already eaten dinner early at 5 p.m. afterward. He went to his room to rest and watch TV on his installed set. The moment my parents walked into the living room and saw the pile of suitcases, they exchanged a knowing glance. Then, without a word, Mom went straight to Mia and hugged her, whispering comforting words, while Dad quietly started rearranging the luggage to make things tidier. Less than 10 minutes later, my sister called me down for dinner. The whole family gathered around the dining table, but I could feel a quiet tension. That evening's meal tried hard to maintain the same warm, casual vibe as usual. Dad talked about a new project at the construction company, though his voice sounded a bit forced. Mom excitedly shared about a new friend she'd met at her yoga club. As for me, I sat quietly, listening, occasionally nodding, but my mind kept drifting back to those suitcases. None of us mentioned Mason. No one brought up the divorce. It was like we were all pretending everything was still normal. Even Zoe ate quietly, her big, round eyes constantly shifting between her mom and the other adults, sensing that something was off, even if she didn't understand exactly what was happening. After dinner, the whole family gathered in the living room to watch the evening news and sip on orange juice. The sound of the TV and Zoe's occasional giggles created a rare moment of ease in an otherwise tense day. Then, suddenly, right in the middle of a commercial break, Dad turned to me with a serious look and asked an unexpected question. "Oliver, can you give your room to Zoe?" I was entirely caught off guard. I looked at him, not quite believing what I just heard. The house only had 4 bedrooms. One for Mom and Dad, one for Grandpa, one for me, and a spare room for guests. I did not understand what he was getting at, and I surprisedly replied, "Are you kidding? Why can't Zoe stay with Mia in the guest room?" Before I could even finish the thought, Mia quickly jumped in. She looked me straight in the eye and said, "Zoe's 9 now. She needs her room to grow. She can't sleep with me forever." Hearing that, I felt like Mia had no grasp of her current situation. A recently divorced woman, clearly going through a rough time, needing temporary shelter. Yet here she was making demands like she owned the place. That quiet frustration in me snapped. I answered firmly, "You're staying here as a favor. You can't just make unreasonable demands like that. I'm not giving up my room." The moment I refused, Mom stepped in, her voice soft but reproachful. "Families are supposed to help each other in hard times. What's the big deal about giving up your room? It's only temporary." At that point, I didn't want to dance around the issue. I asked Mom directly, "If I give up my room for Zoe, where should I sleep?" After that question, the whole room fell silent. No one said a word. They exchanged glances, as if silently discussing something I wasn't meant to be part of. Nearly a minute passed in that thick silence. Then Dad looked at me, his voice cold and flat. "You're 26, Oliver. You can't stay in this house forever. It's time you moved out and got your place. We've supported you long enough." Hearing that, my chest tightened. Not from hurt, but from the harsh realization sinking in. Sitting there in that living room, I finally understood. They had never truly seen me as someone who mattered in this family. Everything I had done for this house had never really counted. To help you understand why I was still living with them, I need to tell you what happened after I graduated from college in 2019. After 4 years at Northwestern University, I was lucky enough to land a job at a major real estate company in Chicago. My starting salary was $55,000 a year, not bad for someone fresh out of school. I returned to Chicago full of hope and plans for the future. During those first few weeks, I spent my time apartment hunting. I checked out dozens of one-bedroom studios. Rent prices in Chicago at the time were pretty steep, averaging between $1,500 and $2,000 per month for a decent place. While I was still debating between 2 apartments, my grandfather, Robert, gave me a call. After a few questions about my new job, he suddenly suggested, "Oliver, why don't you move back in with me? The house is spacious, and you could save on rent to build up your savings for the future." When he said that, I felt a wave of warmth spread through me, and the past few weeks had been stressful, juggling apartment tours, financial planning, and the pressure to get everything started correctly. His offer felt like a breeze of fresh air in the middle of a sweltering summer. Still, I hesitated. Part of me wanted to prove I could live independently, just like my peers. Moving back home might look like I wasn't ready to grow up. After giving it some thought, I declined the offer. I told him, "Thank you, Grandpa, but I want to stand on my own 2 feet. Besides, Mom and Dad are living with you. I don't think they'd be okay with it." When I said that, Grandpa went quiet for a moment. Then he said something that caught me off guard. "This is my house. I decide who gets to live here. Your parents are just staying with me." His words surprised me. I'd always assumed this house belonged to my parents all these years. Turns out that things weren't what I had thought they were. A few seconds later, he added, "I want you close, someone I can talk to. If you live here, you'll save money and I'll have some company." I heard the sincerity in his voice. Grandpa had always been the one I respected and loved most in our family. When I was a kid and my parents were busy with work, he was the one who looked after me and taught me so much. After thinking it over, I accepted his offer. That decision didn't just save me a big chunk of money each month, and gave me time to be with someone I truly cared about. When I told my parents about the decision, their reaction was cold. Dad nodded and said, "That's fine. You'll be able to help take care of Grandpa." Mom didn't seem too thrilled, but didn't say anything either. I could feel it. They saw my return as just another burden. Since moving into Grandpa's house, I have contributed to household expenses independently. Every month, I consistently paid between $800 and $1,200 for electricity, water, gas, and internet utilities. That amount comprised nearly a third of my income, but I never complained. Grandpa never asked me to pay anything. Sometimes he'd say, "You don't need to worry about these things." But I insisted because I believed it was my responsibility while living there. I wanted to prove I wasn't freeloading, that I wasn't some irresponsible adult mooching off my family. Besides covering the bills, I also took it upon myself to do the grocery shopping for the household every weekend. That usually costs me another $200 to $300 each month. I was the one who took Grandpa to his regular medical appointments, even if it meant taking time off work. Whenever the family car had issues, I covered the repair costs without hesitation. And when the washer or the fridge needed replacing, I paid for it myself without a second thought. Over the past 3 years, I have contributed over $60,000 to the family. That's not a small amount for someone just starting in their career. I always thought those contributions would be seen and appreciated. I believed my parents would recognize me as a responsible son who carried part of the family load. But after 3 straight years of giving and giving, all they could say was that they had already supported me enough. Those words felt like knives straight to the heart. They dismissed everything I'd done, treated me like a burden instead of someone who had stepped up. In that moment, I realized I'd been living in an illusion. I believed my parents loved me, that what I gave mattered. But the truth was, they saw me as an outsider, someone they could throw out the moment they needed to make space for someone else. Hearing what my dad said, I couldn't sit there any longer. I looked him straight and asked, "Do you know how much money I've contributed to this house?" Dad furrowed his brow. A few seconds later, he answered coldly, "That's your responsibility for living here." The word responsibility made me scoff, bitterness rising in my chest. I fired back, my voice sharper now. "Responsibility? I've been paying $800 to $1,200 monthly for bills, not counting the extras. Over the past 3 years, I've contributed over $60,000 to this family. And now you're calling me a freeloader." As soon as I finished, my mom jumped in. Her voice was laced with irritation as she said, "What's the point of keeping track like that? We're family." Hearing her say that, I felt rage bubble up inside me. All those years of quietly contributing, all the times I said no to outings with friends to save money for the household, none of it meant anything to them. At that moment, I realized that to my parents, I was nothing more than a guest, a tenant living on borrowed time and not a real family member. Looking at their cold, expressionless faces, I felt like a fool who had trusted the wrong people. I had sacrificed so much over the past 3 years to prove I deserved to be here, and still, they saw me as nothing more than a burden they couldn't wait to get rid of. At that moment, I finally understood what true loneliness meant. It's when you're standing in a room full of people you're supposed to call family, and still feel like a stranger. After hearing their unreasonable words, I didn't want to argue anymore. A wave of exhaustion and disappointment swept over me. With final resolve, I got up from my chair, looked each of them in the eye, and said clearly, "I'm not giving up my room for anyone. This is Grandpa's house. He's the only one with the right to ask me to leave." Right after I said that, my dad's face turned red with anger. He stood up, too, no longer hiding his frustration. He looked at me with a piercing glare and said in a sharp, challenging tone, "Don't use Grandpa to scare me. You're moving out. Now." Hearing that, a fierce wave of rage surged inside me. For 3 years, I had done everything I could to live peacefully, to respect my parents, but now they were treating me like a stranger. I had no interest in holding back anymore. I fired back, blunt and defiant. "Or what?" The room fell into tense silence. Mom sat frozen on the couch, too afraid to step in. Mia clutched Zoe tightly, maybe sensing the heavy tension in the air. And Zoe, wide-eyed and confused, looked back and forth between me and her grandfather, unsure of what was happening. Dad stared at me for a few seconds, his eyes full of cold determination. After thinking it over, he said, voice like ice, "If you want to stay, stay in the garage." Those words hit like a slap across the face. The garage. A place for cars, old boxes, and things no one needs. That's where he wanted me to live, like I was just another useless item shoved into storage. At that moment, I realized I had lost something I could never regain. My belief in my family. I understood that, to my parents, I didn't even measure up to a car. At least a car got a roof over its head in that garage. After Dad said those words, everything went quiet again. The only sounds left were the chaotic pounding of my heart and the heavy breathing of everyone around me. Just as I stood there, unsure how to respond, I heard familiar footsteps coming down the stairs. Grandpa Robert was making his way down. Slowly, steadily, one step at a time. As he descended, he spoke in a calm, even voice, "Paul's right." Those words hit me like a lightning bolt. The look on my face must have shown how shocked I was. I couldn't believe what I'd just heard. This man had invited me to live with him, who had always protected me through everything. And now he was siding with my father? Encouraged by Grandpa's unexpected support, My dad let out a smug laugh and said to me, "See that? Even Grandpa agrees. You're either moving out or sleeping in the garage." Watching the self-satisfied look on his face, I felt a sharp pain deep in my chest. The one person I trusted most in this family had just betrayed me in front of everyone. At that moment, I felt truly alone. A few seconds later, Grandpa entered the living room where we were all gathered. Dad turned to him right away, pleased, and said, "I think letting him stay in the garage is already generous." But before Dad could settle into his victory, Grandpa turned to him with a strange look. Then, suddenly, he spoke up loud and firm. "What I meant is, the ones sleeping in the garage will be you, your wife, and Mia. Zoe's too young to understand what's happening here." His words landed like a bomb in the center of the room. Everyone went completely still in shock. My dad's mouth dropped open. Mom froze like a statue, and Mia stared at Grandpa, stunned beyond belief. As for me, once I realized what Grandpa truly meant, I felt a wave of warmth rush through me. Once again, he had stood up for what was right, defending me in a way no one could have expected. It took nearly 30 seconds for my dad to process what had just been said. His face shifted from smugness to confusion. He turned to Grandpa, stammering, "Dad, you're not serious, are you?" Grandpa looked him dead in the eye and replied firmly, without hesitation, "I'm not joking." Mia immediately jumped in, standing up and pleading, "You can't be this cruel to me. I just got divorced. She didn't even get to finish. Grandpa raised his hand to cut her off. He looked at her sternly and said, "The divorce is your business. Don't use it as an excuse to make unreasonable demands." As soon as he said that, Mia exploded. "You've always favored Oliver." Her words came out sharp, bitter. She broke down into sobs, covering her face with both hands. Her crying echoed through the silent room, thickening the air with discomfort and tension. Grandpa didn't say another word. He stood there, watching Mia for a few seconds, then slowly turned his gaze toward my mother, with disappointment in his eyes, and finally to my father, with the commanding look of a true patriarch. Time seemed to freeze at that moment, and I knew everything in this family was about to change forever. A moment later, Grandpa turned to my dad with a serious look and asked, "Paul, who's been the favored one in this family?" My dad still hadn't recovered from the shock of what just happened. He stood there in silence, pale-faced, clearly scrambling to devise some defense. Seeing that he didn't answer, my mom stepped into the conversation. She spoke in a trying, stern tone to stay calm. "No one's been favored, Dad. We've loved them both the same." The second she finished speaking, Grandpa shot back without hesitation, his voice sharp. "Then why did you ask Oliver to give up his room for Zoe, when Zoe could easily share a room with Mia?" Mom was speechless. She stood there, her mouth opening and closing, but no words came out. Grandpa looked at both of them, his eyes full of disappointment, and said firmly, "You've favored Mia for far too long, and now you're doing it again. Don't think I haven't noticed. I may be old, but I'm not blind." Then, Grandpa began listing all the moments he had witnessed over the years. Times when my parents had clearly shown favoritism toward Mia right before me. He brought up my 10th birthday when they gave me a simple shirt while Mia, whose birthday was in the same month, got an expensive bicycle. He recalled how they proudly boast about Mia's academic achievements while barely acknowledging mine, even when I scored just as high, sometimes higher. He mentioned how my parents always took her side whenever Mia and I fought, no matter how wrong she was. He even mentioned the time Mia broke my telescope, which I had bought with months of saved-up money. Instead of holding her accountable, my parents blamed me for not putting it away properly. Grandpa remembered it all, and he recounted each painful memory with such clarity that no one in the room dared to interrupt him. A deep sense of gratitude swelled in me as I listened to Grandpa speak about those blatant moments of favoritism. Everything he said wasn't just true, it was proof that I hadn't imagined all the injustice. It had been real all along. That was when I realized Grandpa had known everything for a long time. He had watched it happen, had seen the silent hurt I carried, even if he hadn't always stepped in. He had tried, in his subtle way, to warn my parents, but no one ever really listened to him. To avoid stirring up more tension, he had tried to make it up to me in quiet ways, through heartfelt conversations, quiet support, and standing by my decisions. But now, with things having gone too far, he had no choice but to speak up, publicly and directly. In that moment, I understood something deeply. Grandpa's love for me wasn't just affection. It was the justice I had longed for all these years. After calling out my parents for their favoritism, Grandpa moved on to another chapter of this confrontation. He spoke about my quiet contributions to the family over the past 3 years. He mentioned that I had voluntarily paid between $800 and $1,200 monthly for utilities, electricity, water, gas, and internet. He talked about how I would buy groceries for the whole family on weekends, spending an extra $200 to $300 each month, without anyone ever asking me to. He brought up the times I paid for car repairs at least 3 times, how I bought a new washing machine when the old one broke, and even replaced the fridge without complaining. The specific numbers Grandpa shared left my parents with no room to deny anything. He calculated that I had contributed over $60,000 to this household in 3 years. In contrast, he pointed out that my parents only spent a few $100s each month on minor personal expenses and occasional groceries. Hearing Grandpa lay out those details, I felt indescribable joy. Finally, all I had quietly given had been acknowledged, not just recognized, but publicly and clearly. It wasn't just that Grandpa knew. He had been watching, keeping track, and remembering every detail of my effort. Standing there, seeing him back me up with hard facts and undeniable truth, I wanted to rush forward and hug him, to show him how deeply grateful I was. But the heavy tension in the living room didn't allow for that. All I could do was stand still and absorb his words, each one feeling like a priceless gift he was giving me. Every sentence Grandpa spoke felt like a bullet fired directly into my parents' pride. They stood there in silence, unable to offer excuses or deny the truth that had just been laid bare. For the first time in my life, everything I had done in silence was brought into the light, and I felt like a weight had finally been lifted off my shoulders. After saying everything he needed to say about my parents' favoritism and my contributions, Grandpa turned to my father with a stern look. He asked, his voice full of authority, "Now tell me, who's the one that should be sleeping in the garage?" His question cut through the tension in the room like a blade. My dad, my mom, and Mia all fell utterly silent. No one dared to answer. Their faces went pale as they stared down at the floor, as if trying to find a way out. Meanwhile, Zoe was still fixated on her iPad, unaware of the storm unfolding around her. The living room felt suffocating. Everyone knew the answer, but no one wanted to say it. After waiting a moment and getting no reply, Grandpa made his final decision. He announced, his voice steady and unwavering, "Starting today, if you won't sleep in the garage for 1 month, then you don't stay in this house." The moment those words left his mouth, my dad looked like he'd been struck by lightning. He stammered, barely believing what he just heard. "Did you say 1 month?" Without the slightest pause, Grandpa looked him straight in the eye and replied firmly, "That's right." Hearing those words, my dad exploded. He yelled, his voice full of fury, "I'm not sleeping in the garage. If you want to kick me out, do it. But don't forget, I'm your son." But Grandpa didn't flinch. He stared at my father, eyes full of disappointment and sadness, like he was looking at a son he no longer recognized. Then he answered, calm but commanding, "And don't you forget, this is my house." That sentence landed like a final verdict, unchangeable and absolute. My father stood there, his face red with rage, but he had nothing to say. He had played every card he had and still lost. After that, Grandpa turned and began walking back to his room, carrying the weariness of a man who had just made a difficult but necessary decision. As he passed me, he paused and said gently, "Go to your room and get some sleep. It's over." I nodded and headed upstairs without another word, not needing to argue or say anything more. I knew the fight was over, and this time justice had finally been served. As I climbed the stairs, I could still feel the heavy silence lingering in the living room behind me, where the 3 of them were left to face the new reality they had created for themselves. In that moment, it felt like a massive weight had been lifted off my shoulders, and I knew I would sleep soundly tonight in my room. That night, they didn't follow Grandpa's orders. Instead of sleeping in the garage as he had made clear, my parents and Mia slept in their rooms, probably hoping Grandpa had only been bluffing or that he'd change his mind by morning. But they were wrong. Grandpa was furious the next morning when he realized they had defied him. This time he decided to act, not just with words, but with decisive action. Around 9 a.m., the doorbell rang, and a man in a black suit appeared at the front door. It was Michael, the attorney Grandpa had contacted early that morning. When my parents and Mia saw him standing there with a leather briefcase and legal documents, the color drained from their faces. Grandpa didn't waste time. His voice was firm and emotionless, and he said, You have 30 days to leave this house. Attorney Michael will formally notify the court to begin the eviction process. If you're still here after 30 days, I'll proceed with a forced removal order. My dad looked like he'd been struck by lightning. He shouted, his voice desperate. You're being cruel, Dad. But Grandpa didn't flinch. His decision was made, and nothing was going to change his mind. He looked at my father coldly, then said slowly, with steel in his voice, if you choose to stay and be removed by force, every bit of my estate will go to Oliver. My advice? Pack up and leave. I don't want to see your face again. Seeing just how serious Grandpa was, Mia finally lost her composure. She whispered, voice trembling, Grandpa, this is heartless. Grandpa turned to her with a look of deep disappointment. Then he said, if you had followed my request last night and slept in the garage, I would have forgiven you this morning. But you were too stubborn. Hearing that, my mom finally realized how serious the situation had become. She rushed over, grabbed Grandpa's hand, and pleaded, Dad, we were wrong. We'll sleep in the garage tonight. Please don't make us leave. But even as tears streamed down her face, Grandpa remained unmoved. His reply was sharp and final. It's too late. You had your chance. With that, he turned and returned to his room, leaving Attorney Michael behind to handle the paperwork. Michael left soon after, already starting the legal process to carry out Grandpa's decision. I stood quietly in the corner of the living room, watching the moment our family fractured completely. I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. Relief that I was finally protected, and sadness as I witnessed my own family face the consequences of their choices. After the lawyer left, I returned to my room to prepare for my 10 a.m. online meeting. I left my parents and sister in the living room, where they still stood frozen, like statues in the wake of the shock. I tried to focus on work throughout the meeting, but my mind kept drifting back to what was happening just beyond the door. I could hear faint sounds coming from downstairs. Muffled voices, the kind that told me tense discussions were underway. I saw them starting to pack around 11 a.m. Once the meeting ended and I opened my door, the suitcases that had been neatly arranged in the living room just the day before were now open, and they were hurriedly stuffing their belongings inside. Maybe they were afraid Grandpa would follow through with removing them from the will, so they chose to leave early rather than wait the full 30 days. Watching them pack in a rush, their movements tense and anxious, I felt pity and sadness. No matter what had happened, they were still my family. I never wanted to see them leave the house under such circumstances. But I also knew this was a necessary lesson. They had spent far too long living in this house under the comfort of financial support from Grandpa and me. They had grown used to being cared for, without thinking much about responsibility or fairness. Now, faced with the harsh reality of independence, maybe this was the beginning of a new chapter for them. Maybe through the struggles ahead, they would finally learn to appreciate what they had and understand the true meaning of fairness in a family. I hope that as they move on and build a life of their own, they'll grow, reflect, and recognize the mistakes of the past. And maybe one day, when we've all grown and calmed down, we'll be able to repair this family bond on a foundation of genuine respect and fairness. Around 5 p.m. that day, the three of them drove away. Their luggage wasn't much, just a few suitcases and essential items they had packed throughout the day. I figured they'd probably stay in a hotel for a few nights while they looked for a more permanent place. Grandpa didn't come out to see them off. He stayed in his room all day, and now and then, I could hear the faint sound of the TV coming through the door. Maybe he, too, needed time to process the weight of the decisions he had just made. A strange stillness settled over the house when their car engine finally faded down the street. No more conversations from the living room. No more giggles from Zoe. No more arguments or tension lingering in the air. And from that day forward, it was just Grandpa and me living in the 4-bedroom house on the outskirts of Chicago. The house suddenly felt more spacious than ever, but more peaceful than ever. The space that had once been filled with noise and friction was now quiet, calm, and still. I don't know if that's a good or bad thing. Part of me felt relieved. Finally, the peace I had longed for was here. But another part of me couldn't help but feel a little sad that our family had fractured this deeply. Still, Grandpa and I could live on our terms, without the weight of unfairness or favoritism pressing on us. We could enjoy quiet morning coffees and relaxed evenings in front of the TV without bracing for conflict. After everything that happened, I've come to realize something. Sometimes to find true peace, you have to be brave enough to let go of toxic relationships, even when they come from your blood. Nearly 2 years passed in that peaceful house, just Grandpa and me. Our lives settled into a gentle rhythm. Quiet mornings sipping coffee by the window, peaceful evenings watching TV, and talking about everything under the sun. I truly believed that calm would last forever. Until about a month ago. That day, Grandpa was coughing more than usual. Deep, violent coughs that came with sharp pain he tried to hide. I saw him clutching his chest again and again, sometimes having to sit down because he couldn't catch his breath. His face was pale, and cold sweat streamed down his forehead. Sensing something was wrong, I took the entire day off work and rushed him to Northwestern Memorial Hospital, home to one of the best oncology departments in Chicago. Hours of tense waiting, blood tests, CT scans, and endless pacing followed. Then, finally, the doctor called us into the consultation room to share the results. What he said left me numb. Grandpa had late-stage lung cancer. According to the doctor's prognosis, he had no more than 6 months left to live. The cancer had already spread. There was no way to treat it fully anymore. Holding the diagnosis paper in my hand, I felt like my heart had stopped beating. The black text on that white sheet of paper stabbed into me like a blade. 6 months. That number kept echoing like a cruel chant I couldn't silence. Sitting next to Grandpa in the examination room, I felt like the world was collapsing around me. The man who had protected me when no one else would, the one who had stood by me when even my own family turned their backs, was now facing a battle no one ever wins. I sat in the car long before bringing myself inside when we got home. I knew that the time I had left with him was now finite, and I promised myself right then I would spend every remaining day by his side, repaying the love and protection he had given me all these years. Facing Grandpa's illness, I came to realize how fragile life truly is, and how quickly the people we love can be taken away from us. After finding out about Grandpa's illness, I struggled for a long time with whether or not I should tell my parents and Mia. In the end, I decided to call them because after all, he was still their father and grandfather. When I broke the news, their reactions were exactly what I expected. Mom cried uncontrollably over the phone. Dad went silent for a long time before asking, "How is he doing?" Mia sounded shocked and worried. "Oh my God, is it serious?" Less than 2 hours later, the familiar silver Honda Accord appeared at the front gate. They had driven straight from their new apartment in downtown Chicago. Their faces were pale, eyes swollen and red from crying. I opened the door and let them in. When Mom asked, "Where's Grandpa? I want to see him," I told her I must check with him first. I went upstairs, knocked on his door and said, "Grandpa, they're here." His response shocked me. He said in a cold, firm voice, "Tell them I don't want to see them. Send them away." I tried to convince him. I said, "Grandpa, they're worried and want to visit you." But he stood his ground and raised his voice. "I already said it. I don't want to see them." When I came back downstairs and told them, Mom almost collapsed. She begged, "Please, just tell him I want to see him one time. I'll apologize to him for everything." Dad spoke next. He said, "I know he's still angry, but he's sick now. We should see each other." Even Mia broke down and cried, "I just want to apologize to Grandpa." I went back upstairs one more time, but Grandpa still refused. He even said, "If they don't leave, call the police and have them removed." Ultimately, I had to go back down and tell them Grandpa didn't want to see them. No matter how much they cried or begged, I had to ask them to go. I felt torn when they walked back to the car with devastated faces. But I knew Grandpa had every right to decide who he wanted near him in his final days. Since that day, they haven't returned. Maybe they've chosen to respect his final decision. I'm still living in this quiet, peaceful house with Grandpa. Each day feels more precious than ever because I know our time together is limited. Grandpa remains firm in his stance toward my parents and Mia. They call from time to time, but he always refuses to answer. Sometimes they send letters, but he won't read them. He told me, "Some things can't be forgiven, especially when there's no real remorse." I don't try to change his mind anymore. Instead, I focus on caring for him and creating meaningful memories of our time together. We still drink coffee together every morning, even though he coughs more now and is noticeably weaker. We watch TV every night, even if he often falls asleep in the chair. Those simple moments have become priceless to me. Work has also been going better. I got promoted and can work remotely more often, meaning more time by Grandpa's side. Sometimes, when I reflect on everything that's happened, I still feel sadness over how our family broke apart. But I have no regrets. Grandpa taught me an essential lesson about self-respect and fairness. Sometimes you must be brave enough to make hard decisions to protect what's right. And in these final days, I know Grandpa feels peace, knowing he has a grandson who truly loves him and chooses to stay. That's all I ever wanted, to be there for the man who protected me my whole life, right up to the very end. Life may not be perfect, but for me, this is enough. Today, I'm sharing this story, not to gain sympathy, and not to invite judgment toward my parents. I'm telling you this because I want to leave you with something meaningful. We'll sometimes face unfair situations, even within our own families. Maybe you've been treated differently or live in a space where your efforts go unnoticed. I want to say this: don't let anyone, family or not, make you feel like you don't matter. Don't accept injustice just because it comes wrapped in the label of family. And most of all, know when to stand up for yourself. I was lucky to have my grandfather, who taught me about self-respect and fairness. Not everyone has someone like Robert in their lives. But the truth is, you don't need a hero. You can be your own. Life is too short to spend with people who don't value you. Find and hold on to those who genuinely care, those who will stand with you when it's hard. And if you are going through something similar right now, please remember, you are not alone. There are people out there who understand and support you. Don't ever lose hope for a better life. Thank you for listening to my story. What do you think? Was my grandfather too harsh on my parents and sister by refusing to see them during his final days? Leave your thoughts in the comments. I genuinely want to hear your thoughts. And if the story moved you, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share it with someone who might need to hear it. See you in the following story.